Hey everyone, today it is the dead of winter. It is cold. It's not even 30 degrees outside, but you know, the sun's finally poking out, even with the frost still on the ground, my heavy coat on. But today, what we're gonna do, we're gonna plant a vegetable garden, so stick around. Hey everyone, it's Mike. This is Mike's Home and Garden. Welcome to another video. If this is your first time here and you wanna learn about lawn care, grow your own vegetable garden, boost your curb appeal, and do other home improvement projects, start now by subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss out. Like I said in the introduction, it is freezing out. It's 26 degrees. It's cold. Now I'm seeing the sun this morning for the first time in about a week, and I'm really excited about that. It's really encouraging to see the sun and to see the sky starting to clear up. It's also the end of January, and that means we are about 8 to 10 weeks to that last frost date, which is important for somebody who wants to start a garden. The middle to end of January is about that time to start thinking about a plan for planting vegetables in your garden. What do you want to grow? How do you want to grow them? These are some of the things to start thinking about now, some of the things to start preparing for now, so that way in 8 to 10 weeks when things start warming up, you're ready to get a garden growing that's going to be healthy and produce a high yield from spring into summer. So today I want to talk about my plan, my experience from last year, what I learned, and what I'm going to do different this year, and then get that garden started. So stick around to the end. I'm going to talk about some of the crops I'm planning on growing, how they did last year, and what do I expect going forward into 2021. Looking back at 2020, there's three things that I have as really important takeaways that I'm going to apply this year to my garden. First one is have a plan. So we just moved into this house last year in March. So for me, I was just excited to get a garden started. And by the time we got settled and my wife and I got a chance to talk about it, it was just a matter of rushing to the store, grabbing a few vegetable plants for some things that we knew we wanted to grow to eat, and some dirt, and get here and plant it. That was about my plan. Not too much of a plan, is it? The other takeaway is something that last year was out of our control because of the timing of our move, but this year I'm really in control of it, and that is start early. Get a plan and start early, and that is why it's the end of January, it's freezing outside, and I'm walking around my yard talking about starting a vegetable garden because I want to start early this year. And so we're 8 to 10 weeks out from that first frost date. This is prime time to get seedlings started for some of the plants we want to grow in the garden. Your popular ones like tomatoes and peppers take time to establish, and that 8 to 10 weeks is really needed to ensure the seedlings are ready to go come the time in April where it's warm enough to get them out into the yard. So starting early is key, and that's why we're talking today about what the plan is for 2021. And the final thing I want to talk about is know your property. And this is something I learned about last year, and it was a really great experience. And so this year I'm really changing everything around. I put my garden on the west wall of our house in the backyard. And what that ultimately meant, and it's not something I thought about because I didn't have a plan, was it was the last part of the property to get sunlight during the day. Gardens mostly do well with early to mid-morning in the mid-afternoon sun, about good 8 hours of solid sunlight. And the part of the property that I put my garden on, I was thinking in terms of convenience of getting to it. It was right off the back door. Didn't think about moving into this home that was the last part of the property to get sunlight. So this year, I'm moving my two planters out to the northwest corner of the property. It's a flat, well-drained area, and it's also the first area of the backyard to get sunlight during the day. If you haven't started a garden yet, before you do, pay attention to your property and figure out what part of your property you want the garden in, and make sure it coincides with the part of the property that gets consistent sunlight throughout the day. Now, where I'm going to be moving the planters to, which by the way, I am going to have videos on how to build planters, how to move them, how to fill them. So, make sure you hit that subscribe button and follow those different projects as well. Moving those planters to that part of the property is going to ensure from about 8:30 in the morning until about 5 o'clock at night, I'm going to have good steady sunlight. And that is exactly what our plants need in our gardens to thrive and make sure they're healthy and produce a high yield, is to have good drainage and good sunlight. Now that I talked about what I learned in 2020 in terms of starting the first garden in this home, looking into the second season in this home, what is my plan? Well, for one, it's to start early. This year, I'm in control of the date I can start my garden because I'm not moving in the middle of spring. So I'm starting now, the end of January, which in my area is about 8 to 10 weeks out from that last frost date. Now for you, if you're starting a garden in 2021, now's the time, if you haven't done so already, to get a plan together. The first thing to do with that plan is to find out when your last frost date is. A lot of what you're going to do with your garden kind of revolves around knowing what time of the year outside stops getting freezes. Go on Google, get on a search engine, look up last frost date for either your zip code or your city, and find out when it is and count about 8 to 10 weeks back from that, which in the Carolinas right now brings us to the end of January. In your area, it might be a few weeks from now, or you might have already passed that date, but that's okay. Just know when the date is and build your plan around that. Next is to find out what kind of vegetables do you want to grow. For me in particular, I like to grow tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, zucchinis, green beans. I like broccoli, lettuce, carrots, and then a variety of herbs like basil, cilantro, dill, parsley, things like that. So for me and for my plan, I'm starting today, but between now and the actual date that we get things into the ground, we're going to be starting seedlings all throughout that. So it's going to be a pretty active season getting ready. So for you, start listing out what you want to grow. What do you like to eat that's vegetables or fruit? And once you do that, start researching how long it's going to take for germination and for those seedlings to establish. This is crucial to know the timing, is knowing that last frost date and knowing what you want to grow, because that will depend on when you start. So now that we got a plan and we know what we want to grow in our garden, the vegetables we like to eat, and what we want to give to our families, we got to get them started. Now, of course, it's 26 degrees outside. I'm freezing. I'm not going to go into my planter here and just dig a hole and put the seed in. Nothing would happen. It would be a waste of my time. So if you're asking yourself, well, Mike, it's cold out. You know, I've counted back 8 to 10 weeks. I'm ready to start my garden, but what do? We got to go inside and get started. So to get started with planting your seeds for your garden, you need something to put them in. You need the seeds, you need some dirt, and you need a light source. So let's go through the steps to get everything set up to get your garden started. So the first thing you need is something to put the seeds in. This can be pretty versatile. You can use anything from a paper or styrofoam cup to put the seed in. You can use egg crates, though with something small like an egg crate or egg carton, as the seedling grows, you're going to have to probably transplant it a couple times into a bigger container until it's ready to go outside to be planted. That's something to keep in mind with the smaller type containers. There's also something that caught my eye at the Home Depot store I was at, and I'm sure your local nurseries will have something similar as well. It's these like peat moss containers, seed starter sets. So this one is a 7-pot seed starter set. It looks really interesting to me because the pots themselves are a size that's going to be big enough to probably not have to transplant these before having to transplant them into the ground. And then they're also direct plant because it's biodegradable, made out of peat moss. You just put the container right into the ground with the plant in it, so you don't have to disturb the roots. It just goes right into the ground, and it's really easy to get the plant from the seedling cup into the ground once it's time to transplant. So the first thing you have to do with these is fill them with the dirt up to the top, and then once that dirt's in there, mash it down with your hand to compact it a little bit. Not too much, not to where it's hard, but just enough to get some of the air out and get it ready to water to moisten before you put the seed in. So let's go ahead and do that now. So now that we have the dirt in the containers, we've compacted it down just a little bit, got some water in there so the dirt's nice and wet and ready to go for the seeds. Now we don't oversaturate it, but you don't put just a little bit. Really, it's kind of trial and error as the water absorbs into the soil to make sure it's moist, but not over wet and not too dry. Really, it has to be just right, and it's really just trial and error to get the right amount of water. Once that's done, you can go ahead and put the seeds in here. So I recommend at least 2 up to 3 seeds per container as you're getting them ready to germinate. This will ensure you're getting germination across your planters here in case a seed or two does not decide to germinate. It does happen. Another important thing to do is to take a Sharpie or a pen. You can either use a popsicle stick or a label, or you can write right on the side here what kind of pepper or plant you're germinating in that container, especially with things like peppers where many of the seeds look the same and the seedlings look the same. Knowing by listing what's on there, you'll know what you're growing. So I've already done the habaneros in these 4, and I put 3 seeds per container. I'm going to do the jalapenos now so you can see how this process is done. So you just take 1 seed at a time and simply just set it on the top of the wet soil, like so. I'm doing 3, and you just put them around the edge of the container. Just make sure they're evenly spread out, just like that. Put the rest back in there for safekeeping. And now you're going to take a pen. You can use a popsicle stick or even your finger and just press these in just about maybe 1/4 to 1/2 inch. Doesn't have to be too deep, but you don't want them sitting right on the surface. You want to make sure that seed to soil contact is good and that they're under the surface. Just like that. Now, because the soil's wet, when I push the seed down into the dirt, I can still see the top of the seed. I want to make sure there's good coverage so the seed can have that good seed to soil contact for germination. So I'm just going to go around with a little bit extra of the garden soil and cover the tops of the seeds. Just like that. I'll add a little bit more water just to ensure that the soil I just added is moistened as well. Not too much, just enough to keep it damp. And you're all set to go. These now need to get under a light source to start germinating, which is what we're going to go do next. For this particular light source, I'm going to keep it about 4 to 6 inches over the dirt. As the seeds start to germinate, I'll keep an eye out to make sure they don't get too leggy or too tall reaching for light. If they do, I'll move the light source closer. If not, and they keep growing at a consistent rate, I'll continue to move the light up as the plants grow to keep it consistently above it by about 4 to 6 inches until it's time for transplanting. You're going to repeat this process with the tomatoes or any other seeds you establish as well. I just wanted to start with the peppers because they were the first ones I was doing for this season. The process you just saw with the habaneros and jalapenos, we repeat with the tomatoes, 2 to 3 seeds per container, some water, and then get it under the light. And then as well, you're going to repeat the same process with zucchinis, cucumbers, really every other above ground vegetable plant you're going to plant. I say above ground because things like carrots that grow below ground or radishes, for example, you're going to want to direct plant into the dirt when it gets warmer. It's not something you're going to start inside and then move outside. They just don't like being transplanted. Now, with the new seeds that we just started with, in terms of water, you're going to want to keep it consistently moist through germination until you start seeing growth of the plant. And you're going to be doing that by simply keeping an eye on the surface of the dirt. If it starts to look dry, add a little bit of water. There's not really much of a science to it in terms of scheduling. It's really by look or feel. Does it feel dry or look dry? Add some water. Now that light source. I'm going to do a separate video in detail about indoor light sources for plants. But for now, if you're getting started and you want to keep it simple and cheap, there's 2 numbers you need to pay attention to, and that's the lumens and the Kelvin. So the lumens is the intensity of the light source that you have, the light bulb, for example, and the Kelvin is the color. And what we're trying to do is mimic the sunlight indoors, which is really hard to do. But in terms of intensity with lumens, 3,000 to 5,000 is okay to get started with. You're going to be keeping it about 4 to 6 inches above the surface of the dirt or above the plant as it starts to grow. And 3,000 to 5,000 lumens will be just fine doing that. And in terms of the color with the Kelvin, now that number is telling you about where on the spectrum it falls with like the red, the blue, and the yellow light. You're looking for something like 3,000, 4,000, or 5,000 Kelvin, which is right in the middle of that spectrum. Sunlight's between 3,000 to 7,000, I believe, somewhere in there, depending on the intensity and time of day, things like that with season. But if you see something at Lowe's or Home Depot that's 4,000 Kelvin, which looking at the store the other day seems a very popular number, that's just fine. Again, I want to do some more detail about the light sources in a different video, but to get started, 3,000 to 5,000 lumens, about 3,000 to 4,000 Kelvin. Keep it 4 to 6 inches above the surface of the dirt or above the plant, and keep it on the plant for 16 hours a day, and you should see some great results. So I said at the beginning of this video, today we planted a vegetable garden. We did it. The peppers and tomatoes are underway. They're under the grow light. They're going to germinate, and I'm really excited about the 2021 gardening season. So what's your plan? Do you have one yet? Share it down below. Drop a comment. Tell me, what vegetables do you want to grow, and what's your plan to make it happen in 2021? And I'll see you on the next video.